My friends, let us come together in a spirit of quietness, for it is only in stillness that the truth of God can be made known to us. We are not here to acquire something, nor to persuade God to do our bidding. We are here for recognition of that presence which has never been absent from us for a single moment. For many centuries, sincere men and women have prayed with deep longing. They have pleaded for health, for supply, for safety, for peace of mind. They have cried out during illness, in times of loss, in moments of fear, calling upon a God they believed to be somewhere afar, hoping that perhaps their words might reach him. Yet the world remains troubled, bodies grow ill, and fear seems to tighten its grip upon human experience. And in this we begin to perceive that something in our approach has been amiss. You see, the great misunderstanding about prayer lies not in our sincerity, but in the basic assumption upon which our prayer is founded. As long as we believe that God is somewhere outside ourselves and that we must reach out to him to receive good, we are praying from a misconception of the nature of God and the nature of our own being. And no matter how earnest the prayer, no matter how many times it is repeated, a false premise can yield only a false conclusion. We have been taught, often unconsciously, to think of God as a kind of heavenly power, separate from creation, who must be persuaded to act. We imagine that if only we phrase our prayers correctly, or with enough fervor, God will intervene and set aside the very laws of life on our behalf. This is the great human illusion, the belief that God responds to our pleading, that God withholds until we ask, that God requires instruction from us. But the truth is far more beautiful, far more liberating, far more intimate than that. God is not a power who must be moved to action. God is the very life, the very substance, the very being that animates you. The kingdom you have prayed to reach is not distant, it is within your own consciousness. And therefore to pray by asking is to deny the very truth for which we seek. Prayer, as the world knows it, is an attempt to bridge a separation that has never existed, and as long as we pray from that sense of separation, we remain outside the awareness of the presence that is our life. But when we begin to perceive that the divine presence is the eye of our being, that God is the very consciousness through which we pray, we discover that prayer is not a request, it is a recognition. This misunderstanding is the reason why prayer so often seems unanswered. For we have been trying to reach a God who is not out there. We have been trying to persuade a presence who is already fulfilling, maintaining, and sustaining all creation in infinite perfection. We have been trying to change that which, in truth, is already complete. And so, as we enter this study together, let us be willing to lay aside every preconceived notion of prayer. Let us be willing to release all the forms, all the rituals, all the words we have used to implore God, and open ourselves instead to the realization that God is not someone to whom we speak, but the very reality of our being. Once we understand this, prayer becomes not a reaching out, but a resting in, not a striving, but a yielding. Not an attempt to bring God into our experience, but an awareness that God has never been absent from it. When we approach prayer from this standpoint, we begin to taste the peace that passes understanding. And in that peace, harmony flows, not because we have asked, but because the presence that is our life reveals itself. This, then, is our purpose today. To understand why the old way of praying fails, and to open ourselves to the prayer of recognition, the prayer that dissolves fear, heals disease, restores supply, and reveals the kingdom of God right where we stand. My friends, Let us continue in the same stillness with which we began, for truth can only be understood in quietness. When the mind is racing, when fear is speaking, when desire is clamoring for fulfillment, the spiritual ear is closed. And it is with the spiritual ear, never the human intellect, that we perceive the nature of God. Now, let us look deeply at the central error that has kept humanity in bondage for thousands of years. It is the belief, often hidden beneath religious devotion, that God is a power existing somewhere outside of ourselves. It is the unspoken assumption that God is a great being in the sky, a majestic ruler upon a throne, who must be approached, appealed to, and persuaded. Every prayer that begins with the thought that God must come to us, or that God must do something for us, is based upon this error. And as long as we pray from that standpoint, we cannot experience the freedom of spiritual living. For we are attempting to reach that which is already present, and we are asking that which has already been given. You see, the moment we imagine a God separate from our own being, we have stepped out of the realization of oneness. We have created in our thought two powers, God and ourselves, and in that duality lies every form of fear, lack, and discord known to man. Jesus revealed the truth of God's nature when he spoke the words, "I and the Father are one." Not two, not separate, not distant, one. And this was not a statement of personal privilege. It was a revelation of universal truth. The same oneness Jesus realized is the eternal truth of your being. But notice this: if I and the Father are one, then any attempt to reach God is an act of ignorance. It is like the wave trying to reach the ocean, or the branch trying to reach the tree. The wave is already the ocean in expression. The branch is already the life of the tree made visible. And so you too are already the expression of the divine life. The central error is not merely believing in a God outside ourselves. It is believing in a self outside of God. It is believing that there is a me here and a God somewhere else. This sense of separation is the whole of the human problem. It gives rise to fear, for the separated self feels vulnerable. It gives rise to lack, for the separated self imagines supply is outside it. It gives rise to sickness, for the separated self believes life is in the body rather than in God. But once we begin to perceive that the I of our being is God expressing, this entire structure of separation collapses. We no longer pray to a distant God, whose favor must be earned or whose silence must be endured. We rest in the awareness that God is the very life, mind, soul, and substance of our being. When you pray to a God out there, notice what you are implying. You are implying that God is not already here. You are implying that the presence must be summoned. You are implying that the kingdom must be entered rather than recognized. And in that moment of implication, you have denied the truth you seek to realize. God does not come and go. God does not wax and wane. God does not appear when we plead and disappear when we forget. God is the infinite, ever-present life that is living itself as you. And when we turn within not to ask, but to behold, we feel the assurance of this presence. This is the meaning of Jesus' statement, "The kingdom of God is within you." It is not a poetic sentiment. It is spiritual law. And until we embody this law, prayer remains ineffective, for we pray from separation instead of union. The practice of spiritual living begins the moment we stop looking outward and begin recognizing the divine center within our own consciousness. We are not seeking God, we are discovering that the one we have sought has never been absent. We are not traveling toward God, we are awakening to the realization that God is the light of our awareness, the life of our breath, the presence of our being. When this understanding dawns, Prayer becomes a communion, not a request, a recognition, not a petition, a resting, not a striving. For there is no longer a God out there to be reached. There is only the One expressing itself here, now, as the I that I am. Let us continue, my friends, in the same atmosphere of quiet receptivity. Truth does not enter where there is strain or effort. It steals upon us gently, like a soft breeze moving through an open window. And so let our hearts remain open, our minds at rest, and our awareness drawn inward to that sacred center where truth reveals itself. Now, having seen that the belief in a God outside ourselves is the root of ineffective prayer, we are ready to understand the true nature of prayer not as the world practices it, but as it is in spiritual reality. True prayer does not seek to reach God. It does not attempt to persuade God. It does not try to change God's will or alter God's action. True prayer begins with the profound realization that God is already fulfilling, already expressing, already being the infinite harmony of the universe. And what, then, is the function of prayer? Prayer is recognition, the recognition of God as the one and only presence, power, and life of all being. You see, as long as you are asking for anything, you are implying something is missing. You are affirming lack, even while seeking supply. You are affirming illness, even while seeking healing. You are affirming separation, even while seeking union. This is why petitionary prayer cannot reveal the kingdom. It is founded on the belief that something real is absent and must be brought in. But in the presence of the infinite, nothing is missing. Nothing needs to be added to the fullness of God. Therefore, true prayer is not a reaching outward, but a sinking inward. It is not moving toward God, but resting in God. It is the quiet realization that the very presence we have sought is the life that animates our being this moment, the intelligence that thinks as us, the love that beats as our heart. Prayer becomes a state of recognition, recognizing that harmony is the nature of God, and therefore the nature of our being, recognizing that wholeness is the nature of God, and therefore the nature of our being, recognizing that abundance is the nature of God, and therefore the nature of our being. We do not bring these qualities into existence. We recognize them as the eternal truth behind all appearance. Every great spiritual teacher has known this. Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of before you ask, because the fullness of God is already embodied in your true identity. True prayer is not a method for acquiring good. It is the awareness that good is omnipresent. It is not an attempt to remedy problems. It is the recognition that in God, problems have no reality. It is not the effort to attain peace. It is the realization that peace is the atmosphere of divine presence. And so the question arises, if prayer is not asking, if prayer is not petitioning, then what is prayer? Prayer is the inner communion between the individual and the infinite, not two beings meeting, but one being revealing itself to itself. It is the silent beholding of truth. It is the realization that God is the life I live, the mind I think, the soul I am. It is the inner conviction that nothing can be added to God's perfection and nothing can diminish it. When you enter this recognition, a deep peace wells up within you, not because something has changed outwardly, but because something has been revealed inwardly. You begin to feel the invisible activity of grace. You sense the presence. You know, even without words, that all is well. This is true prayer. It is not an act. It is not a technique. It is not an effort. It is the state of consciousness that knows God as the only reality and therefore fears no appearance, needs no protection, and seeks no supply. When the mind is lifted into this awareness, healing occurs not because you have asked for healing, but because the false sense of separation dissolves, and in the presence of oneness, harmony naturally appears. True prayer is a state of illumination. It is the recognition of what has always been, is now, and forever will be. Let us continue, my friends, in the same hush of inner listening, for the truths we will touch now penetrate deeply into the fabric of our spiritual life. These truths cannot be grasped with the analytical mind. They can only be recognized in the quiet depths of our being. We have seen that true prayer is not asking, not pleading, not requesting anything of God. And yet we must look honestly at the fact that much of the world prays in this way, calling upon God for intervention, pleading for relief, crying out in desperation. And we must also acknowledge that, from time to time, such prayers appear to be answered. Something improves, something changes, something seems to respond. And so the human mind concludes that petition must work. But let us look deeper. Petitionary prayer, asking God for things, does not touch the realm of spirit. It does not change the nature of truth. It does not awaken us to the presence. What it may do, occasionally, is alter the outer picture through the level of human thought or emotion. It may produce a temporary relief, a shift in circumstance, a rearranging of effects, but this is not spiritual healing. It is not grace. It is not the action of God. Any so-called answer to petitionary prayer is not a divine miracle. It is the movement of the human mind within its own limited realm. It belongs to the world of appearances, not to the kingdom of God. And because it arises within the realm of the temporary, it will end. It cannot endure. Whatever is gained through petition must eventually be lost, for it is not rooted in the infinite. This is why so many who pray with great passion find themselves returning again and again to the same problems. They have not touched the source. They have merely rearranged the shadows. Petition is the attempt of the human mind to change the picture on the screen. But the screen does not change through effort. It changes when the light behind it changes. When you ask God to heal you, you are implying that God withholds healing until asked. When you ask God for supply, you are implying that God dispenses good in response to human desire. When you ask God for protection, you are implying that danger is real and that God's presence must be summoned to overcome it. These implications are false, and no prayer founded upon a false premise can yield spiritual fruit. The truth is this: God does not respond to human desire. God does not move because we plead. God does not change because we request. God does not intervene because we are afraid. God is infinite, unchanging harmony, ever present, ever flowing, ever expressing. The activity of God is perpetual fullness, perpetual wholeness, perpetual love. Nothing can be added to this. Nothing can be removed from it. Our asking does nothing to alter God. Our asking only reveals our ignorance of God. This is why asking never works, because the one who asks is the human sense of self, and the human sense of self has no connection to reality. And yet, why does asking seem to work occasionally? It seems to work because the human mind, when intensely focused, can temporarily shift the outer picture. This is the realm of suggestion, emotion, and mental force. It is not spiritual. It is not eternal. It is not grace. It is simply the movement of the mind within its own illusion. When the wave crashes, the form is rearranged, but the ocean has not changed. What we seek is not the rearranging of forms, but the realization of truth. And truth does not come through begging. Truth comes through recognition. The moment we stop asking, The moment we stop pleading, the moment we stop trying to get God to act, we become still enough to feel the presence that has been acting all along. We discover that God's grace has never been withheld, that supply has never been absent, that health has never been destroyed, that harmony has never been lost. All of these appear absent only from the standpoint of a mind that believes in separation. And so we see why asking does not work. Because the one who asks is the illusion, truth does not answer illusion. Truth dissolves illusion. And therefore, we must come to prayer not as beggars, but as beholders, not seeking favor, but recognizing fullness, not pleading for change, but awakening to the perfection that already is. The moment we stop asking, we open the door for grace. Grace does not come because we stop asking. Grace is revealed because we become quiet enough to notice it. This is why prayer without request, prayer without petition, prayer without desire is the only prayer that heals. For it is the only prayer in which God can be known as God is omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient being. Let us go on now, my friends, still in the atmosphere of quiet resting, for what we are approaching is not philosophy, nor theory, nor doctrine. It is the living center of spiritual realization. If we grasp this, even dimly, even fleetingly, something within us begins to awaken to a life we have never known. Up to this point, we have seen that the God we have sought out there cannot be found through petition, desire, or effort. We have seen that asking God for help never touches the realm of spirit, and that true prayer begins with recognition, not request. But recognition of what? Recognition of the nature of God, yes, but more importantly, recognition of the nature of the self. The foundation of all spiritual prayer is the understanding of the I of your being. Until this is known, not intellectually, but inwardly, prayer remains a struggle. But the moment it is perceived, even faintly, prayer becomes effortless, healing becomes natural, and harmony becomes the ordinary activity of your life. Now listen carefully, for this is the turning point of the entire spiritual path. The I that you call I, the I that sees, hears, knows, the I that lives is God. I do not mean your personal sense of I, the ego that has a history, opinions, desires, and fears. That is not the true I. That is only a mask, a temporary sense about yourself. It is the I of spiritual being that I speak of, the I that Jesus revealed when he said, "Before Abraham was, I am." He was not speaking of the man called Jesus. He was speaking of the infinite, eternal presence that expresses as individual being. He was speaking of the God identity that is the life of every one of us. Once you understand this, all of spiritual prayer becomes clear. The truth is this: I am is the name of God, and I am is the true identity of every man, woman, and child. Not the human I am, which says I am sick, or I am lonely, or I am afraid. That is only the personal sense speaking. But the divine I am, which is the presence of God individualized. When you say I am, you are using the sacred name, not the personal name. And every time you attach that name to a limitation, you are unknowingly attributing limitation to God. But when you pause, become still, and let the true I reveal itself, something remarkable occurs. Your prayer becomes communion with your own source. Your prayer becomes union with the presence that animates your being. Your prayer becomes the silent recognition that I am is the fullness of God expressing here and now. This is why asking God for healing denies the truth. The I that I am has never been sick. The I that I am is infinite life, pure spirit, incapable of disease. This is why asking God for supply denies the truth. The I that I am is infinite abundance, complete and perfect, lacking nothing. This is why asking God for protection denies the truth. The I that I am is the presence in which there is no danger, no threat, no opposing power. You see, when you pray from the standpoint of I, a person, am asking God, you are praying from illusion. But when you pray from the standpoint of I am, you are praying from reality, and in that realization, harmony appears without effort. The moment you recognize the I of your being as God expressing, prayer becomes the quiet beholding of this truth. You do not try to change anything. You do not try to fix anything. You do not try to influence anything. You simply rest in the awareness. I live, yet not I the Christ liveth as me. I and the Father are one. The I that I am is the presence of God. Now, pay close attention. This realization does not make you God as a person. It reveals that the person was never your identity. The human self is not divine. The personality is not divine. The body is not divine. But the I, the life, the invisible consciousness that animates you, that is divine, that is God showing forth as individual expression. And when prayer arises from this recognition, something profound takes place. You are no longer praying to God. You are abiding in God. You are no longer seeking God's favor. You are resting in God's fullness. You are no longer attempting to reach the presence. You are acknowledging that you are the instrument through which the presence reveals itself. This is the foundation of all spiritual realization. The I of your being is God, and prayer is the recognition of this truth. From this standpoint, healing is not an event, it is a revelation. Supply is not an achievement, it is an appearing. Harmony is not a miracle, it is the natural unfolding of divine being. When you understand the I, you understand all of spiritual healing. When you recognize the I, you understand the nature of grace. When you abide in the I, you enter the state of prayer that Jesus lived. The prayer that does not ask, does not seek, does not plead, but beholds the presence as the very essence of being. This is the prayer that heals without effort, restores without struggle, and reveals without words. Let us go on now, quietly, for we are entering the heart of living the infinite way. Up to this point, we have been laying the foundation, seeing the nature of God, the nature of prayer, the nature of the false self, and most importantly, the nature of the divine I that constitutes your true identity. But spiritual understanding is not complete until it becomes practice, not the practice of doing, but the practice of being, not the practice of techniques, but the practice of recognition. And so now, very gently, let us look together at how we transition from praying as the world prays to praying as one who knows, because, my friends, this is the essential turning point. You do not stop asking God by force of will. You stop asking because you begin to know. And what you know, you no longer plead for. So let me show you what true spiritual practice looks like. Not as a discipline, not as a ritual, but as a devoted returning to reality. You will find that there are no steps in the human sense. There are only natural movements of consciousness. Yet for clarity, let us describe these movements one by one. 1. The pause, laying down the human sense of prayer. Whenever fear arises, whenever the instinct to ask or plead appears, the first movement is a pause. This pause is not effortful. It is simply a moment in which we decline to follow the mind into belief in two powers. It is the refusal to give authority to the problem or to the personal sense of self that believes it must solve the problem. This pause breaks the hypnosis of appearance. It interrupts the human impulse to reach outward. It creates space for truth to reveal itself. In this pause, do not try to think truth. Simply stop the activity of asking. The pause is an opening in consciousness. 2. Entering quiet awareness, the inner sanctuary. After the pause, you allow yourself to settle inward, not into thought, but into awareness. You may close your eyes, or you may not. It matters little. What matters is that you turn from the outer picture and become receptive to the presence that dwells within. There is no attempt to reach anything, no attempt to make something happen, simply a quiet resting in the awareness that God is, and slowly, subtly, you begin to feel a shift, an inner stillness, a gentle assurance, the faint awareness that something is present. This is the beginning of spiritual communion. 3. Recognition, not words, but knowing. Now within this stillness, truth begins to unfold. Again, not as statements you create, but as realizations that rise from within. You may feel or know inwardly, I and the Father are one. The presence is here. The life that I am is God. In the infinite, nothing is missing. All that the Father has is already embodied in my being. These are not affirmations. They are recognitions. You are not trying to make them true. You are beholding that they are true. This is the essence of spiritual prayer. 4. No, requests letting go of the old habit. As you rest in recognition, you will notice that the desire to ask begins to fall away, not because you force it, but because it becomes unnecessary. You realize that you cannot ask God for wholeness is the nature of the I that you are. You cannot ask God for supply is the nature of the I that you are. You cannot ask God for protection, for in God there is nothing to fear. And so, asking becomes impossible. It simply fades out of your consciousness. You no longer need God to do anything. You no longer need God to come. You no longer need God to fix anything. You behold that God is. That is prayer. 5. Resting in silence, allowing the presence to reveal itself. Once recognition has dawned, the practice is simply to rest, to abide in the quiet inner awareness of the presence. You do not speak, you do not think, you do not outline, you do not seek. You simply let the divine I am be felt within you. This rest is the womb of spiritual healing. It is in this rest that the activity of God becomes evident, not because you have performed something, but because you have withdrawn the interference of the human mind. In the silence of recognition, the presence reveals itself. It fills consciousness with peace. It dissolves the sense of fear. It lifts the burden of personal responsibility. This silence is the prayer of communion, and in this communion, harmony flows as effortlessly as sunlight. 6. Letting grace be the door, no human effort remains. In this state of awareness, you come to understand that all spiritual healing is the activity of grace, not the result of thought, not the result of desire, not the result of technique. Grace fulfills itself according to its own nature. And the moment the false sense of separation is dissolved, grace appears as healing, as supply, as safety, as guidance. But grace is not something God does. Grace is what God is. And the moment you cease interfering with asking, pleading, and fearing, grace reveals the harmony that was always present but never recognized. This is the practice of the infinite way, not mental work, but spiritual receptivity, not trying to achieve, but yielding to what already is, not striving to draw God near, but awakening to the God that constitutes your being. My friends, when you begin to live in this practice, you will find that prayer becomes your resting place, not your struggle, your peace, not your effort, your refuge, not your anxiety. You will discover that the presence goes before you, lives as you, and fulfills all things in its own divine order. Thus ends the human practice of prayer and begins the divine life of recognition. Let us go forward gently, my friends, remaining in the stillness that reveals truth. We have come to a point in our journey where we may now perceive one of the most remarkable principles of spiritual life, one that contradicts every human instinct, every psychological habit, every worldly teaching about how to solve problems. It is this: spiritual problems are not solved. They dissolve. And they dissolve not by addressing them, but by recognizing the presence that makes the problem unreal. This truth stands at the heart of all spiritual healing. For centuries, mankind has attempted to fix, change, manipulate, or overcome the conditions of life. We attack disease, resist lack, fight fear, battle temptation, engage in endless efforts to correct outer appearances. Yet the more we struggle with the picture, the more firmly it anchors itself in our experience. Why? Because appearance has no power except the power we give it. Because the condition is not the reality, it is only the mind's interpretation of reality. Because the problem exists only in the realm of separation. Goldsmith often said, "The problem is never in the outer circumstance. The problem is the belief in a self apart from God." And once that belief dissolves, the outer picture loses its seeming reality. You may ask, but if I do not address the problem, how will it change? This question arises only as long as we believe the problem is in the condition. But the moment we realize that the root of all discord lies in the false sense of identity, the moment that illusion is touched by the light of truth, the appearance has no foundation on which to stand. A shadow does not need to be corrected. It disappears in the presence of light. So let us look at this closely. 1. No spiritual healing ever touches the condition. Not one true healing in the history of spiritual realization has ever changed matter, or altered a physical condition, or corrected a human circumstance. The healing takes place exclusively in consciousness when the false identifies itself as false and the true is revealed. When you pray from the standpoint of "I must be healed," you strengthen the belief that you are sick. When you pray from "I must be supplied," you strengthen the belief that you lack. When you pray from "I must be protected," you strengthen the belief in danger. In each case, the personal sense is reinforced and therefore the problem persists. But when you pause, become still, and rest in the recognition, "The I of my being is wholeness," the false image of sickness loses its authority. When you recognize "The I of my being is infinite supply," the appearance of lack loses its foundation. And when you know "The I of my being is the presence in which no threat exists," the sense of danger dissolves. 2. Problems dissolve when you stop giving them identity. Goldsmith would often ask a student, "Who is it that says I have this problem?" The moment you examine this question honestly, the answer becomes clear. It is not the divine I that says, "I am sick." It is not the divine I that says, I am afraid. It is not the divine I that says, I am failing. These statements arise solely from the personal sense of self, the finite, separate, human concept that has no existence in God. The divine I, the presence that is your true being, cannot be sick, cannot be lacking, cannot be endangered. Therefore, the moment you identify yourself with the divine I, the problem is stripped of identity. It has no one left to cling to. It falls away as effortlessly as a dream upon waking. This is why spiritual healing often appears miraculous, not because something extraordinary has occurred, but because the illusion has been recognized as illusion. 3. Illusion dissolves in the presence of truth. Do not try to heal the body. Do not try to change the condition. Do not try to fix the circumstance. Instead, rest in the awareness. I am is the truth of my being, and in that truth no discord exists. As you do this, not as a technique, but as recognition, the light of truth shines. And as light shines, darkness cannot remain. Darkness is not driven out. It simply vanishes, for it never possessed reality. Likewise, the problems of human existence vanish in the presence of realized oneness, not by human effort, not by mental power, but by the nature of the presence itself. 4. The outer picture rearranges itself spontaneously. As the false sense dissolves, harmony appears as the natural activity of grace. You may find the body regains health, supply begins to flow, relationships soften and heal, guidance becomes clear, fear falls away. Circumstances shift with a gentleness that requires no force. But notice this, you did not heal anything. You did not fix anything. You did not manipulate anything. You simply recognized what already was. And in that recognition, the picture changed. This is why Goldsmith said, the only healing is the realization of God. When God is realized, the problem is not solved, it is dissolved. 5. The solution has nothing to do with the condition. This truth may seem strange at first, but as we grow in spiritual insight, it becomes simple and self-evident. Spiritual healing is never dependent upon the nature of the problem. It is dependent only upon the realization of the presence. Whether the issue appears to be physical, financial, emotional, or relational, it is the same illusion, and the same light dissolves it. 6. We never treat problems, we reveal God. Thus, in true prayer, we do not treat disease, we do not treat lack, we do not treat fear, we do not treat sin, we do not treat failure. We reveal God, we reveal the I am, we reveal the one presence, and where one presence is recognized, two powers cannot exist. Therefore, the entire structure of the problem collapses. This, my friends, is why we do not address problems. We acknowledge the presence, and the presence dissolves the illusion. Let us continue now, my friends, still resting in that same atmosphere of inner stillness. For in the silence of receptive awareness, the great mystery of prayer begins to unfold not as something we do, but as something we are. Up to this point, we have laid down the forms of prayer that belong to the personal sense of self, the pleading, the wanting, the asking, the hoping, and we have begun to glimpse the prayer that dissolves illusion, the prayer of recognition, the prayer of knowing, the prayer of stillness. But now we move even deeper. We move into prayer not as desire, but as union, the realization of oneness. This, my friends, is the true nature of spiritual prayer. For as long as prayer is motivated by desire, it remains human. It remains dualistic. It implies a God who must respond, a self who must receive, and a condition that must be changed. This is the old way, the way of separation. It cannot reveal the kingdom. But when desire falls away, something far more sacred emerges. A new dimension of prayer arises, not prayer that seeks, but prayer that beholds. Not prayer that reaches, but prayer that rests. Not prayer that longs for God, but prayer that recognizes God as the very essence of being. This is prayer as union. 1. The end of praying to God. In the personal sense of living, we imagine God as someone to whom we speak, someone to whom we direct words, thoughts, requests. But as the truth dawns, this entire structure dissolves. We discover that God is not an external being at all. God is the very life that is living us. God is the consciousness that is thinking us. God is the self that is being us. And so we no longer pray to God. We rest in God. We commune as God expressing. Goldsmith said, prayer is the union of the soul with its source, not the union of two beings, but the recognition that there is only one. 2. Desire quiets because fullness is recognized. When you truly feel the presence within, when you sense it not as an idea but as living reality, desire evaporates like mist in the morning sun. You no longer crave healing because you recognize that your true being has never been touched by disease. You no longer crave supply because you sense that the infinite is expressing as your very being. You no longer crave peace because you feel peace arising from within like a spring that cannot be exhausted. Desire ceases not by self-discipline, but by revelation. You do not stop wanting because you force yourself to stop. You stop wanting because you discover that you already are the fullness you sought. In that moment, prayer becomes not desire but union. 3. The experience of oneness dawns in silence. There is a moment in spiritual practice, not always dramatic, often very subtle, when you begin to feel that the boundary between you and God has dissolved. It is not an emotional experience. It is not a mystical vision. It is simply a deep inner assurance, a quiet certainty that there is no me separate from the presence. This moment may be brief, it may be soft, but it is the beginning of the true prayer life. For in that recognition of oneness, you realize that prayer is not something you offer to God. It is something God is doing in you. Prayer is no longer an action of the mind. It is an activity of the soul. 4. The nature of this union. What is this union? It is the awareness that the life you feel pulsing within you is God's life. The intelligence that thinks you is God's intelligence. The love that moves through your being is God's love. The I that you call I is the I am. In this union, prayer becomes a state of resting in that recognition. There is no asking because there is nothing to ask for. There is no separation because there is nowhere to go. There is no desire because all is present. Goldsmith would say, you do not enter the presence. You awaken to the presence that has always been. This awakening is prayer. 5. Union produces harmony without effort. As this union becomes the atmosphere of your consciousness, something extraordinary begins to occur. Effort drops away completely. You no longer struggle with life. You no longer fight your circumstances. You no longer try to achieve spiritual experiences or results. Harmony appears not because you seek it, but because you have ceased identifying with the self that believed in discord. Union makes life effortless. Union reveals the kingdom. Union dissolves the illusion of duality. Union is the fulfillment of prayer. 6. Prayer becomes a state of being, not an act. In the personal sense of life, prayer is something you do, a ritual, a discipline, an attempt to reach God. But when you awaken to oneness, prayer becomes your very state of being. You walk in prayer. You rest in prayer. You work in prayer. You meet others in prayer, not because you are thinking spiritual thoughts, but because you are living from the awareness that God is the life of all. This is the meaning of Paul's teaching, pray without ceasing. It is not an instruction to speak words endlessly. It is an invitation to abide in oneness. In prayer as union, the presence becomes the atmosphere in which you live and move and have your being. Problems dissolve naturally. Fear evaporates. Supply flows. Peace becomes the normal tone of life, not because you have received something from God, but because you have recognized yourself as the expression of God. This is true prayer. This is living the infinite way. And now, my friends, as we come to the close of this time together, let us remain in the same stillness that has carried us through this journey. For in spiritual teaching, the ending is never an ending. It is an invitation, a doorway, a turning inward. What we have contemplated together must never become merely words or ideas or philosophies. These truths must be lived not occasionally, not only in times of need, but moment by moment, breath by breath, as the foundation of your being. If there is one message to carry with you, let it be this: the presence is always here, always active, always expressing, always fulfilling itself as your life. You do not need to find it. You do not need to summon it. You do not need to convince it to bless you. You need only return again and again to the awareness of the I that is your true identity. This returning is the essence of the spiritual life. It may happen in the quiet of early morning. It may happen in the midst of your work. It may happen while washing dishes, or walking down a street, or resting at night. At any moment, you can pause and feel the gentle whisper of truth. I am. In that instant, the personal sense softens. The burden lifts, the fear dissolves, and you find yourself once again resting in the eternal presence that never leaves you. This is not effort. This is not discipline. This is remembrance. 1. The continual returning. Do not be discouraged if you forget. Every spiritual student forgets. Every mystic forgets. Even the greatest saints had moments of wandering thought or fear. Forgetfulness is not failure. It is an opportunity to return. And each time you return, each time you pause, each time you feel the presence, each time you recognize the divine I, your consciousness deepens, your awareness ripens, the light within you grows steady, stronger, more luminous. Returning becomes a joy, a refuge, a resting place. 2. Letting the presence live your life. As this awareness becomes the center of your being, you begin to discover something astonishing. You are no longer living life by personal effort. You are no longer relying on your own strength, intelligence, or will. You are no longer striving to make things happen. You find that life with a capital L is living itself as you. The decisions arise from a deeper place. The actions flow with ease. The words come with gentleness. The harmony appears without planning. You begin to walk through life as an instrument of the infinite, guided, sustained, and fulfilled by grace. This is the fruit of prayer as union. 3. No striving for perfection. You do not become perfect by spiritual practice. You become aware that perfection already is. You do not become holy through effort. You awaken to the holiness of the I am within you. You do not become free through discipline. You recognize that the self was never bound. This recognition grows each time you return. 4. Returning even in difficulty. In moments of difficulty, when fear tries to arise, or the old instinct to ask for help surfaces, or the sense of separation creeps in, you need not struggle. Simply pause, turn inward, and remember the presence is here. The I of my being is God. All is well in the one. You need not solve the problem. You need not correct the condition. You need only return to the presence. And the seeming problem dissolves in the light of recognition. This is the great secret of the spiritual way. 5. Living the prayerful life. And so, as you go forward from here, let your life be a prayer, not a prayer of words, but a prayer of awareness. Let every breath remind you of the one who breathes you. Let every moment invite you back into the stillness. Let every challenge draw you into deeper trust. Let every joy deepen your gratitude. Let every encounter reveal the same presence in all. This is the life Jesus lived. This is the life the mystics discovered. This is the life Joel Goldsmith illuminated. And this is the life available to you right now. The presence is your very self. Return to it, rest in it, live from it, and let grace reveal the wholeness that was never absent. 6. Closing awareness. Let us end as we began in silence. As silence filled not with emptiness, but with the fullness of the I am. The silence in which no request, no plea, no desire remains. Only the quiet recognition, the Father within me doeth the works. I and the Father are one. I am that I am. Rest here, live here, return here, and let your life unfold in the effortless rhythm of grace.